Every town has a dark side. And this one's for the people listening from behind the wheel right now. The road trippers who like to cruise around and check out all the sights that this wonderful country has to offer. Because this story starts the way a lot of trips do. With a map, the open road, and the quiet confidence that things will work themselves out along the way. Because they always do, right? I chose this case because it's familiar to all of us, which makes it extremely uncomfortable, as it asks you to sit with the idea that sometimes doing what feels normal and reasonable in the moment can still lead you somewhere you can't get back from. Hey guys, it's Andrew. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Every Town, where today we're checking out a cautionary tale from deep in the desert. Let's head on over to California now and explore the tragic story of the Death Valley Germans. July 8th, 1996, Frankfurt International Airport. Egbert Rimkus stood in the departure terminal with his 11-year-old son, George Weber, waiting aboard a flight bound for the United States. Egbert was 34 years old, an architect from Dresden, and he approached travel the same way he approached work, confidently, with big plans and very little hesitation. And traveling with them were Egbert's girlfriend, 27-year-old Cornelia Meyer, and her 4-year-old son, Max. Together, they were setting out on a 3-week trip across the western United States, a sweeping itinerary that promised the Pacific coast, big cities, and eventually the desert Southwest. They flew first to Seattle and then immediately connected down to Los Angeles. Within hours of landing at LAX, they made their way to the rent-a-car counter and picked up a green 1996 Plymouth Voyager minivan, perfect for the foursome. There was only one small complication. Egbert hadn't brought his driver's license, so Cornelia signed the rental paperwork instead. And that van was due back on July 26th, and their return flight to Germany was scheduled for the following day. So they were all set. Tossed their luggage in the back and off they went. So far, so good. The first stretch of the trip unfolded the way a lot of vacations would on the West Coast. They stayed in San Clemente, a beautiful coastal town in SoCal, to spend time on the beach and experience the sights and sounds of a place they had never been. And back then, there were no iPhones, so they took photos with a Praktica 35mm camera, the kind you have to ration shots on, saving film for the moments that feel worth it. Money, as you know, can go fast in the US, and for the 4 vacationers, it was becoming a little bit of a concern how fast it actually went. On July 12th, Egbert called his bank back in Dresden and arranged for $1,500 to be wired to a Bank of America branch in San Clemente. Now, something went wrong, though, and the funds were sent instead to a branch in Los Angeles. That's 2 hours away without traffic, and whether Egbert ever managed to retrieve that money has never been clearly established, though it's doubtful. By July 21st, the group had driven inland to Las Vegas, checking into the Treasure Island Hotel and Casino. That same day, Egbert sent a fax to his ex-wife, Heike Weber, the mother of his son George, asking her to send money. She did not. The next morning they checked out, and with their cash running low and only a few days left before their scheduled flight home, the trip had entered a different sort of phase. Now, this wasn't really about sightseeing anymore, and they needed to decide how to use what little time and money they had left. So they drove west, headed back towards Los Angeles and right into Death Valley. Now, Death Valley National Park is huge and covers more than 3 million acres of desert, stretching across the California-Nevada border. It's the hottest, driest place in North America, a landscape of salt flats, sand dunes, and sharp mountain ranges that seem to go on forever. In July, temperatures on the valley floor routinely climb past 120 degrees. But it's a national park, so you pay a small entrance fee and you can drive around and see some cool things. Although it's more like hot things if we're being accurate. In that heat, the air shimmers, metal burns to the touch. Even people who know the desert well avoid traveling there in the summer. But from inside an air-conditioned minivan with the windows up and the road stretching straight ahead, the danger isn't all that obvious, especially for a foreign family on vacation that simply doesn't know any better. On July 22nd, the family arrived at the Furnace Creek Visitor Center. Inside, they picked up maps and pamphlets, including a German-language booklet titled Death Valley National Monument Museum Text. And they spoke with park staff and asked about camping, and they were told that camping on the valley floor wasn't allowed. The heat made it too dangerous. But there were legal campsites on the western side of the park, up in the canyons, where higher elevations brought cooler temps. And as they studied the map, one route stood out. Heading west on West Side Road, they could pass through Butte Valley, cross Mengel Pass, and eventually reach the old mining town of Ballarat. From there, they could continue north toward Yosemite National Park. It looked like an adventure, a way to see parts of Death Valley most visitors never reached. On paper, it also looked efficient, the way Germans like it. A way to save time and money and avoid another hotel stay by camping instead. Before leaving that visitor center, they stopped at the store and bought some supplies. A Coleman sleeping bag, a tent, and a small amount of food and water, enough to get them through the next couple of days before departing for home. From there, they drove west toward Hanapa Canyon. On the pavement, it didn't last long though. The road thinned, turned to dirt, and then grew even rougher. But the minivan still kept moving. And that night, they camped near the top of Hanapa Canyon, above the valley floor and out of the worst of the heat. And they took photographs there. The kids played. And for a moment, it probably felt like the trip had opened back up again, like this was what they'd come for. The following morning, they broke camp early, hoping to move before the heat set in. They drove south and then turned west on the Warm Spring Road, a dirt track that led deeper into the park's remote western side. This was backcountry now. We're talking no ranger stations, no services, long stretches of road where you might not see another vehicle all day. It's the type of place you need to plan to go to and not just head out there on a whim. And the road was rough, but still passable. As they approached Warm Spring Camp, they saw what looked like buildings ahead, these low concrete structures scattered across the valley. And from a distance, it could have looked like a settlement, somewhere active, a place to get some insight about the road ahead and provisions. Up close, though, it was clear the place was empty. These buildings, you see, were old concrete cabins built back in the 1930s by a wealthy miner named Louis Grantham, and they had long since been abandoned. The desert had crept back in around them, and there were no people, no vehicles, no movement at all. The only sign of recent visitors was a metal pole with a small box attached, a register. Cornelia opened it and signed the log, writing all four of their names. Beneath it, she added a short note in German, saying they were headed over the pass. And most likely she meant Mengel Pass, the rough route that would take them south, then eventually out of the park. Nearby stood the geologist's cabin, a simple stone shelter maintained by volunteers for hikers who needed a place for rest. From it, they took an American flag, and that flag would later be found inside the van, quietly confirming that they had been there. After that, they drove on, And somewhere after Warm Spring Camp, well, they made a very wrong turn. Mangold Pass isn't a paved road. It's barely a road at all, actually. More of a rocky trail carved through the Penniman Range, passable only by experienced drivers and four-wheel vehicles. When Egbert reached it and saw the terrain ahead, he must have realized right away that their minivan would never make it through. And they turned back, but by then the day was slipping away. It was late afternoon, and heading all the way back to Furnace Creek would take hours. It would also mean driving farther from Los Angeles, the direction they needed to be going. Egbert unfolded the map again, and there appeared to be another way out. A route that ran south through Anvil Canyon, looping back toward the valley floor. On paper, it looked shorter, more direct. What the map didn't show, and what Egbert had no way of knowing, was that this wasn't really a road anymore. Years earlier, it had been used by miners, but in 1994, the California Desert Protection Act designated Anvil Canyon as protected wilderness, closing it to vehicles. By 1996, this road was just a sandy stream bed scattered with hunks of rock and loose gravel. Even people with four-wheel drive trucks avoided it. But standing there in the late afternoon heat, none of that was visible. The route looked passable, and they were running out of time. Egbert turned the van south. At first, the route seemed manageable. They passed through Willow Spring without serious trouble, following the wide, sandy wash as they dipped into Anvil Canyon. The track was uneven, but the van kept moving, and for a while it must have felt like they had made the right choice. But then, the ground began to change. The sand grew deeper, and rocks had pushed up through the surface. The wash narrowed, and the van's front-wheel drive started to struggle for traction. Egbert kept moving forward, knowing that if he stopped, if the tires lost momentum, they wouldn't be able to start again. From there, the rear tires began to tear apart. Sharp rocks cut into the rubber, shredding it piece by piece. And still, the van kept going, grinding forward on flattened tires for more than 2 miles, metal scraping against stone. Eventually, they reached a fork in the wash. Egbert believed the road continued to the right, but it didn't. The correct route had veered left. By the time he realized the mistake and tried to adjust, the van slid into a patch of deep sand and stopped. The wheels spun, the engine revved, but nothing happened. They were stuck. The elevation here was around 3,000 feet, which meant the temperatures hovered near 104 degrees. Hot, but not immediately lethal. The larger problem was where they were. Miles away from any marked trail, far from ranger stations, in a stretch of desert that saw very little traffic, even in cooler months. And they also had no way to call for help. Cornelia stayed with the van and the 2 boys, while Egbert took a beer from their supplies and started walking. He headed east, following Anvil Canyon downstream, hoping to see anything that might offer a way out. After nearly 2 miles, he stopped beneath a small bush to rest. And from there, he could see the mouth of the canyon, about 8 miles away. Beyond that was the valley floor where Badwater Road ran, another 16 miles away. Too far to walk, especially with 2 young children. And he sat in the shade, drinking his beer, working through their options. Now, going back meant returning to the geologist's cabin, 4 miles in brutal heat, with no guarantee of finding help. The valley floor, well, that was out of reach, but there was a third possibility. On the map, the northern boundary of the China Lake Naval Weapons Station lay about 9 miles to the south. In Germany, military bases were fenced, guarded, and impossible to miss. And Egbert assumed the same would be true here. that if they reached the perimeter, someone would see them and they could get help. What he couldn't have known was that in this stretch of the American desert, there were no fences, no regular patrols, nobody was watching. See, the land itself provided the security because it's so impossible to navigate. When he finished his beer, he left the bottle beneath the bush, along with a shallow impression in the sand where he had sat trying to find shade. Then he walked back to the van. And that night they camped beside it. They played with the kids so they wouldn't worry, and they took more photographs. Maybe they even still believed rescue was only a matter of walking far enough south and that eventually they'd be seen. But the Germans never boarded their return flight on July 27th. When Egbert and George didn't come home, Egbert's ex-wife Heike began asking questions. The German travel agency they had used contacted the American rental car company, and the car hadn't been returned. On July 31st, German and U.S. authorities officially listed the 4 tourists as missing and alerted Interpol. But without a starting point, there was little investigators could do. And then, on October 21st of 1996, nearly 3 months later, a military helicopter flying routine surveillance over Death Valley spotted something out of place. Ranger Dave Bremer was aboard the helicopter searching for illegal drug labs, and he noticed a vehicle sitting in Anvil Canyon, miles away from any legal road, and he landed nearby and walked over to it. It was a green 1996 Plymouth Voyager minivan, dusty, locked, and abandoned. 3 of its 4 tires were completely shredded, destroyed by miles of rock and gravel. And Bremer radioed the license plate to park headquarters, and the vehicle came back as stolen, reported by Dollar Rent-A-Car after it was never returned. But when the rental records were checked, something else appeared. The names of 4 German tourists, all flagged by Interpol. The next day, investigator Eric Hyman arrived by helicopter with sheriff's deputies. They unlocked the van and searched it, and inside were camping supplies. A brand new sleeping bag still in its box, an empty sleeping bag box, and a tent. There were toys, luggage, clothing, and rolls of exposed camera film. And drinks of all kinds, 2 unopened bottles of beer, 1 empty, bottles of bourbon, and several large empty water containers. And there was also an unused spare tire and jack, and the American flag from the geologist's cabin. But there were no passports, no wallets, no keys, and no sign of the family. A massive search and rescue effort launched where more than 200 people took part, including multiple helicopter teams. At any given time, at least 45 searchers were in the field, and the crews searched hundreds of square miles, fanning out in all directions using the van as a starting point. And they found only one small piece of evidence, the beer bottle Egbert had left beneath the bush, along with the impression in the sand where he had sat. The bottle matched the brand found in the van. Beyond that, though, there was nothing. On October 26th, after spending more than $80,000, authorities officially called off the entire search. And for the next 13 years, the case went cold. The theories filled the void, that the family had faked their disappearance, that there had been a custody dispute, even darker ideas involving murder, but there was no evidence for any of it. It was pure speculation. And then, in the late 2000s, a man named Tom Mahood learned about the case. An experienced hiker and search and rescue volunteer, he was methodical and analytical, and something about the story nagged at him. So, he began studying the original reports, and poring over maps and rethinking where the family might have gone. And the original search teams had approached the case like seasoned desert travelers, asking what someone familiar with Death Valley would have done. Mahood questioned that assumption. What if the Germans had made choices no local ever would? What if they had gone somewhere no one expected to look? So he focused on one area that had seen very little attention, directly south of the van toward the China Lake Naval Weapons Station. If Egbert believed the base was patrolled, he may have led his family that way, not realizing how far it actually was or that no one was monitoring the perimeter. Mahood made several solo trips into the area, nearly dying from heat exhaustion on one occasion. Still, he kept returning. In November of 2009, he went back with Les Walker, another experienced search and rescue volunteer. They split up, staying in contact by radio as they moved across the rough terrain. And then Walker's radio crackled to life. He'd found a wine bottle, fragments of its label still clinging to the glass, then something that looked like toilet paper but wasn't. Up close, it turned out to be pages from a planner, covered in handwritten German. A moment later, Walker came back on the radio, his voice quieter this time. He'd found bones.
These pictures taken by Walker show a wine bottle he found along one of the paths they may have used after their van got stuck in the sand. He also found papers written in German and a wallet, passport, and ID belonging to Miss Myers. Walker believes the remains he found near the wallet are hers.
Nearby were torn pages from her planner, filled with business cards from hotels and attractions the family had visited. There was another beer bottle and the sole of a small shoe. But there was evidence of only one person, Cornelia. There was no sign of Egbert and no sign of the children.
I couldn't believe that we'd actually came upon the remains, try to get into their mind where they would have gone having left their van in this wash in Death Valley and where they would have gone from there.
The two men documented everything carefully, taking only the wallet containing Cornelia's identification as proof. Sheriff's deputies later returned to the site and conducted their own searches, recovering additional scattered skeletal remains. In March of 2010, Mahood made another trip and discovered a set of keys that appeared to be European. The following month, he returned with another volunteer and identified what seemed to be a more realistic route the family might have taken, a path descending from higher ground toward the valley. Along a hill post painted red at the top, ringed with stones and topped with an amber beer bottle. It appeared to be a marker, and possibly left by the Germans themselves. In May of 2010, authorities confirmed that DNA recovered from some of the remains matched Egbert Rimkus. Additional searches uncovered skeletal fragments believed to belong to 11-year-old George, though the remains were too degraded for definitive DNA testing. And the remains of 4-year-old Max, well, they were never officially found. Eventually, the investigation was closed and the sheriff's office asked that no further searches be conducted. All recovered evidence was returned to the families in Germany. So after all the searching, all the theories, and all the years, what actually happened out there? The timeline pieced together suggests that after Egbert returned from his scouting walk, the family spent the night at the van. Early the next morning, July 24th, they set out on foot, walking east along Anvil Canyon to the spot where Egbert had stopped the day before. From there, they turned south toward what he believed was a patrolled military perimeter. At first, the walk was manageable, with relatively flat ground, but the heat was relentless. In extreme conditions, adults can lose 2 to 3 liters of water per hour, and children lose roughly half that. To stay hydrated, the family would have needed 20 to 30 liters of water, and they didn't have anywhere close to that. About 6 miles from the van, the wash narrowed and curved right, ending at a hillside. And faced with the choice of following the bend or dropping down into the canyon, well, they went down. It would have seemed easier, faster. Instead, though, they carried them deeper into the wilderness, farther from any chance of rescue. And they made it roughly 9 miles from the van before they could go no further. At some point, Egbert may have continued on alone, searching for help, while Cornelia stayed with the boys, or they may have stopped together. The scattered remains suggest they died from heat stroke and dehydration in one of the most remote parts of Death Valley. And meanwhile, just miles away, runners were competing in the annual Badwater Ultramarathon, a 135-mile race from the lowest point in North America toward Mount Whitney. Support crews and organizers were stationed along the route, and if the family had known, if they had gone east instead of south, they actually might have found help. But they didn't know, and they were close, and yet impossibly far. And so, Death Valley, true to its name, claimed 4 more lives. So that's going to do it for this week's episode of Everytown. Hope you all enjoyed it. Appreciate you very much for checking us out. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to come on back here next week. Same time, same place for another episode of Everytown filled with scary, strange, and mysterious stories. Because you never know. Maybe your town will be next.